represents the microphone, and I will do 2 minutes of stand-up here like this, and when I go to sit down, it is the narrative that hopefully draws a thread among us. So when you say I'm ready, oh, ready. Okay. I began this last chapter of my life when I moved to Asheville in 2010. I was a broken man looking for a new start, desperately hoping for a female companion to help heal the wounds of my divorce and recent relationship fiascos. I did not know then that I had the 3 Ps that made me irresistible to women of a certain age. I had a pulse, a pension, and a Prius. I was a very unlikely guy to settle in Asheville. I don't hike. I don't drink beer. I'm not an organic Nazi vegan. And most horrifically, I'm sorry to say, I do not pray at the shrine of house pets. But I was desperate. So I found myself at a vegan meetup. During the social period, a woman who I was attracted to was complaining to some others that her next-door neighbors left their dogs on their deck from early morning until evening. And the dog's primary activity was barking. They barked at passing cars, pedestrians, even falling leaves. This was driving her crazy. Sensing an opening, I said, now I wouldn't do this, but in New York, they would wrap chopped beef around crushed glass, lob it onto the deck, and a half hour later, voila, problem solved. But this is Asheville. And she said, are you crazy? Red meat? Incidentally, no dogs were harmed in the writing of this joke. I moved here in 2010 in an ill-fated domestic relationship. What ran like a smooth engine in New York, it slowly stalled in the mountains of North Carolina. I discovered the College for Seniors at the Reuters Center at UNC Asheville. I began taking classes, and in the spring of 2012, I taught my first class, performing stand-up comedy, culminating in a gratifying and successful live show witnessed by an appreciative audience of more than 120. By July of that year, my relationship was imploding. Thanks largely to me, our harmony descended into discord. So when a guy from my comedy class shared that he had originated several men's groups through the college, I decided to check out a group called Men's Wisdom Works. And on July 12, 2012, I reluctantly joined Chuck Fink and 10 other men in the clubhouse of Biltmore Park to see if it fit for me. At the age of 65, I was among the youngest in the room. I was happy to find that 2 of the other men were also from my class, so I trusted that humor would be in fine form. Chuck's agenda was to facilitate the first meeting and then leave the group to work out its future. He suggested we share our reason for coming. Well, what a revelation. The first guy told us that his wife was in the latter stages of Alzheimer's and that he was and would continue to be her primary caregiver, and hoped that joining a group would be a welcome diversion from his loneliness. Another guy told us that he had stage 4 colon cancer and a prognosis of 3 to 5 years to live. And he was there because he wanted to bond with a few men for friendship. My head exploded at that point, and I missed the next several shares, thinking that if I had Nick's diagnosis, I wouldn't be joining a group. I'd be out drugging and gambling and whoring my 401k away. This guy was very scary to me. I came back in focus in time to hear a normal guy with a normal issue, very relatable. He had been a high-profile guy in his field and found he identified himself by what he did, not sure of whom he was, retired from long-time work. This fellow got my attention. When my turn came, I shared in excruciating detail the domestic horror I was experiencing, painfully honest about my role in this failing relationship. I was surprised by the laughter that came. I soon understood that they were not laughing at me. Rather, they identified with my pain and found my delivery amusing and relatable. So I joined the group. I asked Nick if he would have dinner with me so I could understand just what he was experiencing. Knowing he had an end date gave him a perspective that few of us could identify with, including me. We met at a pizza place and had a remarkable and unlikely bond was born. 6 years older, Nick became the big brother I never had. We had so many differences. I was a native New Yorker. He grew up in semi-rural North Carolina with an older brother and younger sister. While I raised my family on Long Island, Nick was living in a posh area of Connecticut. I ate Paul Newman popcorn. Nick belonged to Newman's Country Club. On the night of our first dinner, Nick said that he was fine with his prognosis, the exception being the pain he knew the cancer would bring him at the end. Otherwise, he felt free to create whatever end game he wanted. He first put all his affairs in order, making legal, spiritual, and healthcare decisions. Then he doubled down and created a class at the college called The Gift of Time, chronicling his journey. He brought in an elder care attorney, a doctor who shared end-of-life options, and a minister who shared his perspective on our spiritual adventure. Many seniors, including myself, benefited from this class, which continues even now after his passing. At our dinner, I contrasted his vision with mine of whoring and gambling. He laughed, and our great friendship began. He often said I made him laugh just by saying hello. In our group check-in once, a guy told of having encountered an injured duck, taking it to the vet and facilitating its recovery. When my turn came, I asked for a show of hands. How many of you, when Alan talked about the duck, imagined cherry or orange sauce with the entree? Nick was the only one honest enough to laugh and raise his hand. What Nick brought to my table was more substantial. Through him, I got a great primary caregiver. He referred me to the law firm that represented me in the legal mess with my domestic partner. Best of all, he introduced me to his condominium community, a 55-plus retirement property, where I rented for a year, undecided whether to stay in Asheville or go back to the one-bedroom apartment I owned in New York. Nick was a man of many pleasures. He enjoyed a good steak and a drink or two at dinner. Every summer, he rented a beach house for his beloved daughters, their spouses, and children. It inspired me to take my family on a Caribbean cruise. A simple joy for Nick was the motion sensor outside his front door. He loved walking to his door at night, keys clanging as his advance illuminated the space, allowing him to see what the hell he was doing. My condo rental did not have this amenity. Nick was fastidious in his appearance. Saturday mornings included shining his shoes, needed or not, and ironing his clothes. I confided that I'm terrified by ironing boards, totally unable to open them without injury. He laughed this time at me. My legal situation got resolved. I signed on for a second year at the condo. I began teaching a yearly class in stand-up comedy with, I think, great success. Nick joined one class, and I remember his best joke. He said, "I don't have enough time left to attend to all 10 commandments. On a given day, I'm lucky if I can bang out 5 of them." I added film classes to my repertoire, featuring my favorite comedians, Mel Brooks, Sid Caesar, Woody Allen, Billy Crystal, Robin Williams, among others. Lots of participants enjoying their films, and my comedic input was ego gratifying. And the fact that this was unpaid was not really relevant. In 2015, I sold my New York apartment and bought a condo in the same community Nick lived and I had been renting. It did have a motion sensor, but it worked only intermittently. Oh well. The summer of 2017 presented two major changes, both around the same time. Until that year, my love affair with theater was a one-way street. I was always in the audience. Unless we have to include Camp Ranger, 1960. They had a new play director that year, and every age group performed on successive Saturday nights in the Ranger Playhouse. Auditions were the first week of camp, and our show, which was Oklahoma, would be rehearsed and performed on the fourth Saturday. To my shock, I was cast as Curly, the male hero, who woos and seduces Laurie. The girl selected was a year older than I and simply out of my league. I was 13. I had no idea how to deal with my hormones and the anxiety of opening the show with a solo on stage with a bale of alfalfa. In fact, I was afraid I would sound like Alfalfa of the Little Rascals, singing embarrassingly off-key. So I did what every junior addict in training does. I lied and manipulated. The first day of rehearsals, I faked a wrist injury and was driven to Monticello Hospital for x-rays. The director immediately replaced me, and I got to play the villainous Judd Fry, a smaller and much more realistic role. After that, no more acting for me. Until 2017, that is. I auditioned for and was cast as the Rabbi in Hart's production of Fiddler on the Roof in Waynesville. I have since auditioned for maybe 60 plays and performed in 8 or 9. I'm sure that all the directors in Western North Carolina are thrilled to know that in every show in which I was not cast, on seeing the production, I agreed that the actor who played the part I had sought was the right choice. Stand-up comedy is me with an audience. In fact, all my performance work is me in the spotlight. How different in theater. There, the work of each individual reflects on the success of the show. It's an environment where everyone roots for each other. And what a learning curve it was. I was picked because, as the director told me, you can carry a tune. I also knew I had a commanding voice, but blending voices? I must confess I do not know an octave from an octopus. Pitch? That's a baseball term. And dancing. The choreographer introduced a dance so complicated that a girl in the cast, trained in dance and music, wept during an early break. I learned to fake it till I make it, and sometimes I never made it, but blended into the scene. Fiddler rehearsals began in early June, preparing us for a 15-performance run in July. At the same time, I was experiencing strange symptoms that I feared were heart-related. I took all the tests: blood, stress, x-ray, EKG. Finally, after getting a second opinion at Duke, I opted for a heart cath on Friday, June 23rd. I awoke to see the face of a surgeon. Welcome back. You have 7 blockages. I'll see you Tuesday for surgery. What? Can't we wait till the end of July when my show ends? No, Tuesday. I reached out to the director, who told me he'd bring in a substitute, but that as soon as I was ready, I was welcome back. He even offered me a vintage wheelchair. Surgery was successful. 2 days later, I'm walking the ICU, pulling the IV pole with one hand and using the other to cover my exposed ass. Discharged on Saturday with instructions to walk twice a day, increasing my time at least 1 minute per walk. Climbing the 14 steps to get upstairs to my home, I needed a chair on the landing to rest halfway. I missed Tech Week at the theater, but I'm walking 2 to 3 times a day, going further and longer each time out. I'm motivated. Soon I'm walking the inner perimeter of Ingalls in order to escape the heat. Next, I'm walking like a guy who left the checkout line to speed walk for his forgotten eggs. I missed the opening weekend, 3 shows. I get my first review. I'm referred to as the actor who fell ill. By the middle of the next week, I think I'm ready to join the show. My daughter takes me to the Friday show where we watch from the audience. My girlfriend drove us both on Saturday night, my debut. It was exhausting and exhilarating. I declined the wheelchair because I had a comic turn in the wedding dance, and this comic does not turn down the opportunity for a laugh. It was a challenge to perform the next day's matinee, I must say, but I survived. I continued my rehab, daily walking through Ingalls, able to drive the half a mile to and from, but little else. A generous castmate drove me to and from the show for the last 2 weekends. I am blessed to have been cast, grateful for the motivation to make it back to the show, and enriched by the experience I'm given in every production I've been in. A community of strangers who become, at least for a short while, a family. 2017 also brought Nick down. He stopped driving that summer and barely left his home. His sister Patty moved in and took charge of his care. The great news he shared was from his oncologist, who told him that he would not die from the cancer and the pain that he feared. Anemia would take him out. Nick's relief was palpable. I was a frequent and welcome visitor, and we laughed together almost until the end. A week before he died, he was barely lucid, his voice weak. I thought his medication was responsible for the fantasy he spun that day, a reminiscence of spending summers on a farm with his brother and sister. He spoke of the beloved caretaker, Carl, and the 3 mules they rode together, Annie, Rhodey, and he couldn't remember the name of the 3rd mule. Well, I enabled this fable, and as Patty passed the room, I laughingly told her what Nick shared, and when I got to the forgotten name, she said Nellie. Nick's story was completely true, and I blush to this day, remembering my ignorant disbelief. Several days later, his last words to me were, "I can't wait to go." My great friend and mentor passed on November 29th, 2017. In early 2020, during the pandemic, my condominium reinstalled the outside lights of all the owners, and so we all had working motion sensors. I had little cause to be out after dark, quarantining, but the first night I did come home at night, as I approached my front door, the light went on. Without thought, I immediately said, "Good night, Nick." I say it every time. Curtain. Where are those eggs?